Welcome back to On Point. Now, let's take a look at how the markets have fared out throughout today's trading. Then, if we quickly kick things off out in Asian trading, it began slightly positive, but unfortunately by close of trade, most of the market had gone down, with only the Nikkei out in Japan going up around 0.7%. Then the Hang Seng was 0.33% lower, so too was the Shanghai Composite as well. Unfortunately, not good news as well out of the Dow Jones Industrial initially yesterday, but managing to climb up as well. Then the S&P 500 had initially moved past 3,000 points in trade yesterday, but unfortunately that surge also then fell off. In European trade, of course, this is today's trading then. The CAC 40 out in France doing fairly well, going up more than 2%, while the DAX out in Germany as well enjoying some good numbers, nearly 2% higher there, 1.4% for the FTSE 100, which of course had that banking holiday earlier this week as well and didn't trade, so some buoyancy really coming back into that market trade there. If we check things out here at the Johannesburg Stock Exchange then as well, positivity then for the local exchange, around just over 1/3% for the local market there, boosted a lot by the resources index, which has gone up 1.5%. So the platinum account is doing fairly well on that front. The financials also up nearly 1%, with the banks leading that upsurge on that front. Not a good day, however, for gold, which has dipped down 1.5% today. So negative trading across the board on that front. Checking onto your commodities board then as well, the Brent crude price has fallen off 1.63% today, having seen that surge climb and go past $36 a barrel then for Brent crude. Demand perhaps getting back into the market, but fears that the global economy may not recover as quickly as some would have thought has certainly played its role in pushing down the Brent crude price. Platinum is, however, higher, around 1/3%, while gold is quite the opposite, 1/3% lower at this stage as well. In your local currency, a slightly better South African currency there at 17.35 against the US dollar has been pretty stable then and looks to be getting ever so better. It's at a 2-month level, 2 months best level then for the local currency. It's 19 Rand 11 for a euro, and a pound sterling will cost you 21 Rand and 38 cents. Michael Traherne is from Vestact, and he joins us now as well via Skype as we get to unpack this market movement a little bit more. Michael, appreciate the time. So it has been quite difficult to ascertain exactly where things are going, but if you have the S&P 500 then climbing past 3,000 points, clearly the stock market does not reflect what the economy is doing, and more evidence of that in that one there.
Yeah, so the stock market's effectively reflecting global economies opening up. The stock market's taking it as a positive signal. Investors have already factored in that 2020 profits are already going to be dismal for most global companies, and they're now looking forward to what does 2021 hold. And for that to take place, we need an open economy. So as we get positive news about economies opening, you'll see stock prices going higher. And yesterday we saw Japan reduce their state of emergency, and that's a third positive sentiment.
Yeah, and Japan then coming out with even more stimulus perhaps for their economy, another $1.1 trillion worth of stimulus. That brings it to about 40% of their GDP when it comes to stimulus efforts. Yes, they're in a recession, but do they need it that badly?
Sure, and I suppose you have to back the decision makers there to know what exactly is needed. But the overall goal, stimulus in general, create a stimulus so that small businesses survive the lockdown. Big businesses are in generally a stronger financial position. They have the ability to go to debt markets to raise more money. They can go to shareholders to raise more money. Your small businesses that the stimulus survive, that's what our government is trying to do. Because if the small businesses can survive the short lockdown period, they're in a position to then continue operating when lockdown reduces. So that's the goal.
Yeah, talking about raising money locally, you have Sasol then in a bit of a dire situation, and then word comes out that maybe the Central Energy Fund may be looking to invest in some of its assets, of course denying the petrol station saga, but the crux of it here is that Sasol needs to sell some assets in order to pay down its debt. Are those assets still viable? Does the asset portfolio at Sasol still entice investors?
Yeah, I think definitely. Sasol's in a very unique position. They've got some brilliant technology. They've got brilliant people who work for them. So there will definitely be interested parties out there. The problem is when you're a company that's forced to sell assets to pay down debt, investors or potential buyers want to buy your crown jewels. They don't want to buy the assets that you don't think are worth much. And that's the problem. So Sasol's already come out and said, look, we're not selling our fuel stations. If anything, we want to grow our network. So that rumor is now being squashed. But it still looks like the U.S. operations, which is a large part of their debt that they've raised, those might be up for sale. And unfortunately, given the current environment in the global oil market, that asset might not make much money. So depending on how those sales go and how their debt levels look over the next 6 months or so, will be a very big determinant in the Sasol share price.
Yeah, would you say, though, that Sasol's success from here on is fully dependent then on Lake Charles as well?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Lake Charles is one of their biggest projects. It only came online at the beginning of this year or end of last year. It was meant to start producing profits. Even though it has been running during a COVID-19 lockdown, it hasn't been producing the profits that are needed. So it's very much a case of how long it will take until that asset is properly profitable again. Would I invest in Sasol? I think it's still a coin toss at the moment. Don't forget that they've already told shareholders that they're probably going to be asking for money in the next year or so. So it all depends on how business goes for the next year. It will depend on how much money they ask from shareholders. And if they don't ask for much from shareholders, then the share price will do really well. But if they ask for a huge sum of money from shareholders, the share price is going to be decimated.
Yeah, so the market can really be aware, though, that Sasol are asking for a minimum, or rather a maximum, a ceiling of $2 billion or around 35 billion rand as well. Then they've limited it to that, but of course fully dependent on how the other measures go. In terms of other company news as well, Woolworths coming out with some earnings results today. Fairly robust in the first 8 weeks or so in the second half of the year. But then the 9 weeks after that, the ones to April the 26th or so, things not looking too good.
Yeah, the Woolies food division, that's the shining light in the results. So, you know, all those people running out to buy those hot chickens that they weren't allowed to buy during lockdown, seeming to help. But yeah, their clothing division, obviously that was completely closed for the full month. And even though that it's slightly open now, they're limited on what they can sell. Making matters worse is the Australian division looks like it will need at least around 900 million rand up to potentially 1.1 billion rand in extra funding to keep afloat. So it's been tough, but luckily for Woolworths, they do have the food division that has at least brought in some profit.
Yeah. All right, Michael, appreciate the time. Thank you so much for it. That's Michael Traherne there from Vestact Asset Management chatting to us about that market picture. Then some earnings news, some other company news as well, and the likes of Sasol. We'll continue to unpack those very same stories and a little bit more as well right after the short break. Do stay tuned. This is On Point.